So the process of taking the goal sheet to the teacher or the parent provides daily feedback to the child about how they're doing on their target goal. And then also if they bring the goal sheet back to you in your session, it gives you weekly feedback about how they're progressing, at least on that particular goal. So it can be very useful feedback in how the child's doing outside of the therapy setting, which is what we're really looking for information for. And then it encourages the generalization of the skills that they're learning in the sessions with you, their application of those skills outside of the sessions as well. And in addition to that, it can also help to engage the child in the intervention so that they hear you as someone who's interested in the goals that they have for themselves, their personal goals, and see the program as relevant to them personally and helping them obtain the goals that they set for themselves as well. So the structure of the goal setting process, really the first and second session is meant to be an orientation for the children to the concept of what a personal goal is. Often it's the first time that they're thinking of personal goals in this way. If they've had a behavior contract or behavior system at school already, then it's familiar to them. But if not, it may be the first time that they're learning that concept. So after the second session, the goal at the end of the second session is to really have each child identify a goal for themselves for the week and to start setting a weekly goal. And as Dr. Lochman was describing, really before the program begins, you want to get as much information from the teachers and also the parents, if possible, about what the child's strengths as well as their behavioral needs are, so that you're prepared in your own mind for directions to steer the child in terms of what goals may be useful for them to work on. And then the goal in the second session is to have a collaborative discussion of what a personal goal is, and then have walk the child through identifying some of their own goals for themselves. And it's collaborative in the sense that you elicit their input and hear from them what they would really like to accomplish or areas they think they could use to improve on, but guiding that discussion with the knowledge that you have from the input, either on assessment data that you have or input from the teachers or the parents. And as far as the actual process, if the child's capable, it's great if the child actually writes out their goal on their goal sheet themselves. I like to talk it through with them first to make sure that they write a goal that is attainable and observable. So I like them to say what their goal is out loud and talk through that before they actually write it onto their sheet. And then the ideal that we strive for is for the child to be responsible to take the goal sheet to the teacher or the parent each day to sign. So that's the ideal that we always strive for. Some of these children have a lot of difficulty with organization and remembering, and if that's the case, we can involve their teacher or their parent to help find a systematic way and time for them to remember to do that each day. And then there are reward incentives in the program through the points that they earn and the way that they can use those points to purchase prizes or incentives that can help motivate them to work on their personal goals and to remember to have the sheet signed on a daily basis. So when we introduce the concept of goals to the children, we can define a goal as something that you work towards or something that you're working for. And as Dr. Lochman was describing earlier, we want to write the goal in a way that's as observable as possible and also that the child can meet. So rather than saying that I will complete all of my homework, if the child's currently turning in almost none of their homework, it might be better to write a goal that I will turn in all of my math work this week to set the goal at a level that you think is attainable for the child. Or start with a subject that's of greater interest to them, something that they're motivated to work on. And so we want the children to be responsible for the goal sheet. And it's worth taking some time to talk through specifically with them when would be a good time each day to take the goal sheet to the teacher. Is there something systematic that occurs at the end of the day each day? Does the teacher look over your assignment folder or some other kind of behavior tracking form at the end of the day each day? And if so, to try to piggyback on that for their goal sheet for coping power, to have the teacher sign it. And that's something else you could get input from the teacher about if you meet with the teacher before the program begins, to get their input on what time each day would be useful for the child to bring the goal sheet to them. and if they have a procedure that they want to recommend for that. And more than just a yes or no on the goal sheet, we really encourage the children to talk through the goal with the parents and the teacher, to come up with ideas for goals together, and also for the teacher or the parent, whoever's evaluating the child on the goal sheet, to just even give them a few sentences of why they think they met the goal or not, what they did well, and what they could use to improve on if they didn't reach their goal so that they could meet it the next day. So there are a series of short video clips that we often show to the students to model for them what a goal is, and to give you a sense for how this can look in a group format. So after the second session, one of the things that you start each session with is a review of the material from the prior session, and then check in with each child about how they did on their goal sheet. And so this is an example in this video of the children going around and reading what their goal was and how they did.
Goals are 1, something you want and are willing to work for, and 2, real and possible for you. Listen as these group members read the goals they have set for themselves.
My goal is to not have to go to the timeout chair in my classroom for at least 3 out of 5 days.
My goal is to finish my math worksheet in class for at least 4 out of 5 days.
My goal is to control my temper and not get into a fight at recess for 5 out of 5 days.
Learning to set goals is a skill. Listen to these next 2 goals. One of them is far too big for the group member to achieve. He wants it, but it's too difficult to be possible. It is a badly written goal. The other is challenging, but possible. Which of these next 2 goals is a well-written goal?
My goal is to be the best kid in class and not get into any trouble at all for 5 out of 5 days.
My goal is to stay at my seat during art class and remember to ask permission to get up for 4 out of 5 days.
Okay, so which of those was a better written goal? 2, and why is that? So it was more observable and more attainable, more realistic. It's pretty common, though, that the children, particularly early on in this process, will come up with things like, I just need to be good, or I need to be nice to everybody. And they're pretty global in their definition of goals. So part of our job is helping them to break that down into attainable levels. And you may have noticed the children there were saying, I'll reach that goal 3 out of 5 days or 4 out of 5 days. That was an attempt to make sure that we were writing the goals at a threshold that was attainable for them, but it was a little bit complicated. So we've shifted to just write a goal that they should be able to reach every day of the week, and then award 1 point per day of the week that they have a yes on their goal sheet. So we have shifted a little bit from what you saw in the video. Any other comments or reactions to that video clip? So the sessions also have several activities that are repeated at the end of the session. So you're introducing these activities for the first time in the first session, and then we'll close each session with these activities from that point on. And it's important. How many of you have followed a program where you had a specific kind of agenda of activities for the session and had to kind of manage your time to get through all of that? Okay, some, but not many of you. So if that's the case, this would be new if you're trying to use this program. And it helps to have an idea for yourself of how much time to allot to the earlier objectives so that you have time for some of these repeated activities at the end. And these can take somewhere between 5 to 10 minutes, depending on how you approach it. So the first of the closing objectives is to have a time of positive feedback. It's sometimes called a compliment circle. But what we do is ask each child to share something that they learned in coping power that day. and something that they're proud of themselves for, that they did well either during the session or between sessions that week. And we try to frame that in terms of a way that you used what you learned in here outside of group this week. So try to keep it specific to the skills that we're working on and learning in the program. And then they're asked to compliment another group member. And it can work best if you put some structure on it. So each person says something they're proud of themselves for and then gives a compliment to the person sitting to their right or left, and you can go in a circle. So once they learn to do this, it's a very nice time of recognizing positive gains, and actually the process of giving compliments to others is not something that comes naturally to these children. They haven't necessarily been complimented a lot themselves or learned how to do that for others. So particularly in the first few sessions, this activity can really take some time. And often you need to spend time modeling for the children what an appropriate compliment looks like, both for themselves and others. So at the end of the first session, I would actually go around the room and give each child a compliment to show them the kind of thing we're looking for. So I would say, Sylvia, I really liked how you were listening to what we were talking about today, and several of your responses really showed me that you were listening and following along with what we were learning, so that was great. Sam, I really liked how you stayed in your seat. I know there were a couple times that you really wanted to get up, but you didn't, and you asked permission before you got up, so that was great. And so you can go around and give each child a compliment, trying to tap into some of the behaviors that you think that you already know from the assessment data that you have that they need to work on, and also modeling the type of compliments that you're looking for. So it really is worth, at least in the first session, if not the first few sessions, taking the time to model that first, and then really monitoring carefully as the children go around and compliment each other, to try to de-emphasize things like, I like your hair, or I like your clothes, and to try to make it something specific about their behavior, and then also to avoid backhanded compliments. So I started a group session, and one of the compliments was, I really liked how you didn't join in the I Hate Tara Club today. That was really great, how you didn't take part in that. So it was really not a compliment at all. It was really introducing this terrible thing that happened at school earlier the day and trying to kind of find a way to get that in there. So you have to monitor that well and put the kibosh on that kind of thing and model for them more appropriate compliments that you're looking for. And it can be nice to practice specific things like making eye contact with the person who you're complimenting and using their name. And that takes practice for many of these children, so you really have to practice that in the first few sessions. But after a few sessions, they kind of get the hang of it and can often start doing that well on their own. And then the next objective is to give each child feedback on the points that they've earned in the program. So they have, you can tell them whether or not they earned their point for positive participation that day. And you can either just go ahead and tell them what your impression is of whether or not they participated well that day, or you can ask for them to evaluate themselves, reserving the right to be the one who has the ultimate decision whether they were accurate or not about that. And then you'll also inform them whether or not they earned their point for following the rules, which they would earn if they had not gotten 3 strikes throughout the group session. And then there may be other points that they earned, points on their goal sheet or points for homework assignments as well. And then we typically have a prize box of incentives that they can earn of different values, and we'll show some examples of that on another slide. So you want to save, the children enjoy this part of the program the most, so you definitely want to reserve at least 5 minutes, if not more, for them to have time to go through the prize box and decide if they want to spend or save. It can also be nice, the prize box itself can be a time of shoving or pushing or behavioral issues, so it can be nice to put some structure on that to let them go 1 or 2 at a time to the prize box. And then there's also an optional free time activity at the end. So if you're able to reserve 5 or 10 minutes of time at the end of each session, it can be something that's very motivating for children to earn, especially if they're at school and it means 5 or 10 minutes that they're out of class getting to do something fun. That can be very motivating for them. You can set a requirement so that every student who earns their positive participation point, or who remembers to bring their goal sheet back and has at least 2 yeses, and participates well can engage in the free time activity. So it's something that they're really excited about and often motivated to work for, but it does mean that you have to move along through the other content to have that time. And then also, even though it's free time, you want to monitor them closely during that time. So things that they could do are play board games or draw. If you're using the program one-on-one, some children really love to play on your computer. So anything like that would be, that was motivating to them would be fine, but you do want to kind of monitor their interactions with each other during that time and make sure that the group rules are still in effect. So this is an example of the kinds of things that we might include in a prize box of items. So from looking at it, you can see these are things that you would need to have a budget to be able to purchase. How many of you have some kind of treasure box or incentives that you use right now? Okay, so some. So we try to find a range of reinforcers and award point values to it so that we have prizes that are small enough that the child could probably purchase, earn enough points to purchase during each group session. So often school supplies, things like pencils, erasers, things of that nature, we try to set a really low level on so they can earn that each time. And then we try to have a range of larger items, sports equipment or water bottles. They love things with our university logo on it that they're willing to work for. And we've really let each child pick. There's some children who want to buy a mechanical pencil. Seems really popular. They want to buy one of those every time. And other children want to save and save and save and not spend so that they're the person who has the most points in the group. And that's reinforcing enough to them. So we kind of allow that to happen. We can try to encourage them to delay gratification. But at this point, we're really wanting to engage them in the program and get excited about it. So we kind of let them decide what's motivating to them. And knowing that having a budget for these incentives can be difficult, and also that relational incentives can be the most powerful incentives anyway. We want to, definitely let you know that you don't have to have a box of material incentives in order to use the point system and have the students motivated about that. So do any of you have low cost or no cost incentives that you use that you found the children to be really excited about? Food is a big one, so popcorn. Often they'll really work for a small drink or snack. Some things just occur organically in your group. So I was running a group last year where the structure of the room was that there was one big teacher's chair and then 6 students' chair. And after the first session, I realized that they really wanted to be the one to sit in that big teacher's chair. They would work for it. So we set that as an incentive that whoever had the most points on their goal sheet could get to sit in that big chair. So you can kind of look for things that the students seem excited about and add that to your prize box as you go along. And then these are other ideas that often work well. So we've had students work for the opportunity to be the one to read the morning announcements over the loudspeaker at school, to earn a coupon to get to sit in their seat backwards, either during your group session, or it could be in class if the teacher agrees to it. So some of these you'd have to get permission from the teacher up front. But they're actually great at coming up with ideas as well for things that they'd be willing to offer in the classroom. So we'll offer an additional free time at the end of group where I had one student who loved to tell jokes. So I told him that I would have a joke ready for the end of each session, and if he earned 5 points, that he would get to hear the joke. Other groups love to sing or dance, so you could let them work towards some time at the extra time at the end to do that. Free homework pass, or getting to cut in line pass, or going first in the lunch line can all be things that you could set a fairly moderate to high level of points on that the students will really work for that wouldn't cost any money at all. So we tend to make a large poster so that the children can track their points visually. So we'll make a large poster with their names on it, and the different categories of points that they can earn during each group session, and then track those on the wall so that they can have a nice visual representation of the different types of points that they've earned and how many points they have overall. So we would have the dates of the group sessions and then the children's name, and some of the ways that they could earn points are listed up here. So you can see that Chris B. earned his group rules point on September 8th. He must have gotten 3 strikes because he didn't earn that point on September 15th. He did earn his positive participation point for each of these sessions. The first session didn't have any goal points, but the remaining sessions he earned either 1 or 2 points on his goal sheet. And then we'll tally up and inform each child how many points they have total and allow them to decide whether they want to spend or save those points. And then we also total up the group's points, how many points the group as a whole has earned, and use that towards a group incentive as well. And so the primary group incentive that we've used is the opportunity to earn a pizza party. So we'll make a poster like this and divide a pizza into 8 or 10 slices and have kind of Velcro on the back and set a criteria so that if, as a group, every time the group earns 75% of the points possible for the session, they can fill in a slice of pizza towards a pizza party. So, for example, in the first session, if there were 5 group members and they each had a chance to earn a point for positive participation and a point for following the rules, that would have been 10 points possible for the day as a group. So if they earned at least 8 of those 10 points, then they would get to fill in a slice of pizza on their poster. And this has a number of purposes, but it can really work well in getting the group to work together as a team. And if you do have any kind of high-functioning group members or group members who are really motivated by the pizza party, they can really serve as a positive peer role to remind the others to have their goal sheet signed or to work on their goal in the classroom, or to behave well during the group session as well. So it can really strengthen that group dynamic and have them work together as a team. So there are some challenges that can come up with this goal setting process. So particularly early on, as children are learning the concept, they may generate goals that are very broad or unrealistic. So often we have to really model for them more realistic and more specific goals. Forgetting to return the goal sheets can be a very big challenge. So a lot of these children have kind of organization or executive function problems. So we've tried to figure out a lot of ways to give them reminders and to help them return their goal sheets. Forgetting to bring it to the teacher or not taking responsibility to have it signed can be an issue. And some children are less motivated than others to work on their goals. And other children who, if they have coexisting anxiety, could be shy about taking the goal sheet to the teacher or the parent and being evaluated. So that can be a challenge as well.
For children that have ADHD or have more of the disability component to whatever's going on, are the incentives then encouraged to do, instead of waiting for a week, more on a day so that it's an immediate, an immediate reward rather than having to wait a week for that?
I think it would be great. It depends on what your role is and how often you're at the school and what you're able to offer. So I think the more frequent they get feedback, the better. But if you are only coming into the school once a week or having the child come to your office once a week, then it could be more difficult to do that. But that could be something that you could collaborate with the teacher on in the classroom as well, if that was a role that they could fill for you by giving that information to the teacher in the classroom. Or if you're working with the parent on a home goal, the child has a goal at home, and the parent is the one who's kind of signing off on that. You could agree upon an incentive that the child could be earning at home on a daily basis that the parent can provide. So some of the challenges that can come up with goal setting on the parent and teacher end is, so I gave the example earlier that the child may not be turning in any of their homework. And we may set the goal that they will at least turn in all of their math work for the week. Well, to the teacher, that may not seem sufficient. This child needs to turn in 100% of his work. That's what's expected. So that can be a challenge to communicate with the teachers about why we're setting very specific and attainable goals when we ultimately want them to be working toward larger goals. And so a lot of that has to do with collaborating with teachers on the concept of shaping behaviors in small kind of baby steps. And then forgetting to sign the sheet. So different teachers really have different levels of commitment and motivation for the program. Some are really willing to remind the children and be involved in that process, and others can leave it entirely upon the child to be the one to remember to have the goal sheet signed. And we do want to make sure that the children are taking the goal sheet to the teacher at a time that's least disruptive to the classroom as well, so not in the middle of a lesson or instruction. So some of the solutions that we've found to be very helpful to address some of these issues are to work together both with the child as well as with the parent and teacher to make sure the goal is written in an attainable way. And I try to be very responsive to any feedback that the teacher gives. So if the teacher writes a note on the goal sheet or catches you in the hall and says this is too easy or this is too hard or can we change this, to be very responsive to that as well. And to try to be in as close communication as I can with them to make sure that the goals are useful and attainable. It can help to post the goal sheet in an obvious location. So if they're working on it at home, they could put it on a refrigerator or on a mirror, somewhere that they're looking at regularly. At school, we'll often have the children, if they have some kind of assignment folder where they're keeping a list of their assignments or a planner, at the end of each school day, we'll have them actually take their goal sheet out of their workbook and put it in that planner so that they see it right there at a time that they have another systematic activity each day. Other things we've done is put like a little sticker or reminder note on their desk to help them remember. And then elicit buddies so that if two children in your group have the same teacher in the same classroom, that they could kind of remind each other. So if one remembers to take his goal sheet to the teacher to have it signed, that he'll kind of make eye contact and remind the other child to do so as well. And then giving lots of positive feedback. So when you review the goal sheets at the start of each group, particularly early in the program, it's really worth taking time to assess how each child did and give a lot of positive feedback to the children who remembered to have their goal sheet signed. Talk about how they remembered to have it signed, what made you think of it, how did you remember to do it, what time of day did you take it to the teacher, so that the other group members who may have had more difficulty heard that. And then you can also problem solve with the students who didn't have theirs signed about what you could do differently the next week to try to show them that you're going to keep having that expectation that they have it signed as well. So in the second and third session is when we really get into the concept of long-term versus short-term goals and have the students start identifying some personal long-term and short-term goals for themselves. Before we do that, the session starts by asking each student to recall one thing that they learned from the previous session. So we start that in the second session and then repeat that throughout the program. So it sends the message that we want you to be thinking about what you're learning in here outside of our meetings so that you remember what you're learning and it's useful to you. And then there's some new content on the goal setting, and then the closing activities that will be repeated from each session on the positive feedback, the prize box, and then the optional free time. So for the new content on setting long-term and short-term goals, we want to help each child kind of understand the difference between a long-term goal and a short-term goal. So a long-term goal would be something that you could accomplish or obtain 6 months or a year down the road. And a short-term goal would be the things that you could be doing on a daily or a weekly basis to reach that goal. And then also to help them identify barriers that along the way, once you've set a goal for yourself, you may run into some roadblocks or barriers that make it difficult. And that wouldn't be a time to give up, but you want to think about how you could overcome those barriers to achieve your goals. So the way we do this, there's actually a worksheet that is in the workbooks that you have. So it's page 10 of the child workbooks that you have. And we use the worksheet to kind of break apart the concept of long-term and short-term goals. And one thing that we try to do is really differentiate a dream from a goal. So the children may say that they want to be a professional basketball player, or they want to sing on American Idol. And we may try to separate out that's a great dream to have that's a little further down the road than we're talking about. We're kind of looking for things that you might be able to do this year or before you go to middle school, to kind of define the time range for them a little bit. And then what we do is to at least walk through one example with the group. You can ask them to generate ideas for long-term goals and then write at least one of those long-term goals on the board and have them generate short-term goals that you would need to accomplish on a daily or weekly basis in order to reach that long-term goal. So we have some examples here. So one example might be to get along better with the teacher and other students in the classroom, to feel better about my time with my parents at home, or to get along better with my siblings. So let's just say that we picked the first one to walk through with the children, to get along better with my teacher and other students in the classroom. So if that's the long-term goal that the child's picked, what are some of the short-term goals that they may need to work on daily or weekly in order to reach that long-term goal? You'll have ideas about that? So if the long-term goal is to get along better with the teacher and other students in the classroom, so let's say the child acknowledges that the teacher's on me a lot and I don't have any friends, and those are the child's main complaints, you could turn that into a positively worded long-term goal of to get along better with the teacher and the other children in the classroom. So they've kind of identified that as a long-term goal that they think they could use to work on and are willing to work on. What are some of the short-term behaviors that you would kind of list out on a list of short-term goals that would help them reach that long-term goal? Okay, so my teacher seems to like it when I raise my hand before speaking, and if I do that, she'll get on me less. So I could work on raising my hand in class before speaking each day as a short-term goal. Great, what else? Okay, so I'll try to share the remote control at home, and that could cause less conflict with my sibling and make my parents happier with me. Okay. Okay, so I'll try to compliment at least one student each day in my class, and that might help improve my relationship with my classmates. Oops, say it again. Oh, okay, so I'll try to find an activity that my brother or sister would like and play that with them. Great, so those are examples of the type of short-term goals that you can help the child to generate. And this isn't in the workbook, but is something that we found useful in representing this concept of short-term and long-term goals to the children, is the idea of a stair-step. And with the long-term goal being at the top of the stair-step and the short-term goal being the behaviors or things that you need to work on along the way to reach the goal at the top of the stair-step. So if a child does tell you that their goal is to be a professional basketball player, you could say, okay, well, let's go with that. Are you on a basketball team right now? No? Okay, well, why not? Well, I was kicked off the team for fighting. Okay. Well, would you like to get back on a basketball team? Yes, I would. Okay, well, let's put that as your long-term goal, to get back on a basketball team. What would be some of the things that you might need to do as short-term goals in order to make it on the basketball team? So what do y'all think? Okay, so learn to not hog the ball, to take turns so it doesn't cause fights with my teammates. Okay, what else?
Follow directions of the coach.
Okay, do what the coach says, follow the directions. Okay. Learn how to take turns. Okay, if you know the child was getting into fights in basketball, you could talk about how to handle it if you miss miss a basket or someone taunts you on the court, you could come up with a goal like, being able to keep my cool even if I miss a basket, or if someone else taunts me. So, and this is also an example of how you can use a goal that the child might tell you, like wanting to be a professional basketball player, and kind of get down into some of the daily skills that they could be working on now in 5th grade, some of the social and emotional coping skills that are still tied to something they enjoy, like playing basketball. So what we actually thought we would do is take a minute and have you all practice this. So what we've done is made copies of that handout that's from the workbook. So what we could do is have you separate into pairs of 2, and one of you will play the clinician, and the other one will play a child. And let's try to put some parameters on it. So let's say this is a 4th grade boy. We've got a 10-year-old boy. And he has ADHD and also some oppositional defiant characteristics. He's getting in trouble frequently in the classroom for missing assignments and for talking back to the teachers. And the parents are kind of frustrated with, he's fighting a lot with his sister at home. So some of his strengths are that he loves baseball and he loves video games. And he and his family enjoy going camping together. Okay? So one of you can opt to play that child and the other one can opt to play the clinician. And so the clinician's goal is to kind of help explain the concept of long-term and short-term goals to the child, and then have him identify one long-term goal that he wants to accomplish by the end of 4th grade. And then to break that long-term goal into specific short-term goals, hopefully reflecting some of the skills that you're trying to teach in the program, having to do with getting along with his teacher, getting along with his family, completing his work in school, that kind of thing, in a way that kind of fits his interests and motivation as well. Okay? And let's take a few minutes and just process how that went, what you thought about the activity, what went well, and maybe what the challenges were. So would anyone be willing to share how it went with your group? Uh-huh.
It's actually easy as a kid to just say, this great big thing that you want to do. So it is hard to get focused in.
Okay. So you were the kid. So what did your clinician do to kind of introduce the concept to you and get you focused in?
Well, we were talking about rules, and we want to follow the rules. And she said, well, what rule exactly are you talking about? And then how many days of the week are you going to do that rule, follow that rule? And so we keep narrowing it down. Instead of this great big thing about follow the rules.
Yeah.
Asking my questions like, well, what would you be doing differently when you are following the rules? Get a sense of what the behaviors take place when you are actually doing it.
Yeah, I almost kind of visualize the activity as an inverted pyramid of discussion, where you start with some open-ended discussion about what interests the child has, things they would like to work on, or if they get stuck there, things their parent or teacher told them they need to work on, and then kind of start focusing in from there with specific questions that can help kind of target the discussion. So any challenges or concerns raised by anyone run into roadblocks that would be worth discussing as a group? I heard, go ahead.
What about, I guess it was hard to figure out what the frequency was in order to be successful in the goal. Like, in other words, it was either, like you had mentioned before, that now you don't use a thing about how many days out of the week you do something, but it's more an achievable goal each day. So, for example, does that mean you have to turn your homework in every day? Or is there some other less big goal that you want something to complete?
Yeah. So how did you handle it in your role play? Yeah. That's where the questioning can help. Like, well, how are you doing on that right now? How many days a week right now? What subjects do you turn your homework in, or what does your teacher say when you get a progress report on that?
I guess the problem with the long-term goal is she wanted to get an A on her behavior and the report card.
Uh-huh.
Right now she's getting D's.
Uh-huh.
So she's like, E. I'm like, okay, so that might take a while.
Uh-huh.
But we spread out the time to reach the long-term goal, because I didn't want to tell them, okay, let's just aim for C's then, because you're getting because she wanted A's, so I wanted to go with that.
Yeah.
Make it realistic.
Yeah. Yeah, and given that it's a long-term goal, I think you could write that down as a goal. I think another group had that goal to get, to improve their conduct grade in class, and then had a nice set of specific behaviors, like do what the teacher says the first time, not bother the people around me, pay attention in class, take turns. So they had a nice list of very concrete short-term goals that hopefully would help the child improve their conduct grade, if not get an A on it.
But then we thought like 7 was too much. Because
Yeah. And it could be the kind of thing where if you get only 3 or 4 or 5, you could always add to it later. So you can, and we had some questions about whether the child should be writing or whether the clinician should be writing. And that can go either way. If the child's capable of writing, oftentimes they get enthusiastic about doing that, so you can let the child write. You do have to slow them down so they don't write the first thing that came to mind. So we had a child back here whose long-term goal was to be rich. And so if they wrote that down as their long-term goal, the first minute they had the form, you'd be a little stuck. But if you were able to discuss it a little bit and say, okay, well, if you want, it sounds like you really want to be rich and successful when you grow up. What are some things that you can be doing now in 4th grade and that, could help you achieve that down the road? And then come up with something they could be doing in 4th grade, like, actually, I'm not really doing well in math at all, and if I want to be rich, I've got to be able to add and subtract. So my long-term goal will be to get an A in math for the semester.
So you're doing this with 6 or 8 kids, right? You're doing it with them one at a time, and you're getting other kids to help them do this problem solving. Are you so because if you've got 88 kids,
Right. Yep.
Yep.
It's
doing whatever, climbing up the wall.
Yep.
So,
Right.
So do you get the other kids involved in thinking and helping each other think these things through? Or?
It's an excellent question. And what we typically do in practice is to go through 1 or 2 examples on the board together as a group, and then give each child this worksheet to work on individually, and then the co-leaders circulate the room. So you're at least working with 1, if not kind of 2 at a time, standing between them, looking over them, making sure they're on track with the ideas that they're coming up with. So it's a really excellent example of why it's helpful to have a co-leader if you can as well, so the other ones who you aren't paying attention to aren't kind of running around the room. So, and then individually, it's easier if you were to use the same activity in an individual session. But also, if you do have a higher functioning group member, they could serve as a peer helper to. If they finish theirs quickly, they could serve as a peer helper to another student who's having more trouble on it as well. You have a hand? Uh-huh. I think that can vary. So the typical format in which we've used the program is 1 group session a week, lasting somewhere between 50 minutes and an hour for the child groups. When you're taking time out of the school day, the schools won't always give you quite that much time. Sometimes the school periods are 40 minutes or so. So we have to kind of work with what the schools will give us. And then when folks have used the program in other settings, like in an inpatient setting or an after-school setting, they could actually have more frequent sessions than that. So it does kind of depend on your setting and what's possible there. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Learning out the answers or whatnot, then maybe if he can attain that for 4 days, by Thursday, then on Friday, he can have free time on the computer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Most of us, at least in this group, a couple of us, we work in a kind of the schools as social work. Personally, I service 5 schools, so it becomes a challenge.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm running one group now with ABPP children. I see them once a week. And it could get a little bit, challenging working with them, but I'm not at each school every day.
Right,
So I have
right.
to depend on teachers
Mm-hmm.
Counselors, another.
Mm-hmm.
So individuals, when you guys do the program, who would be the one? Would it be the teacher telling you, okay, Johnny did well every day, or getting that daily?
Mm-hmm. We have often co-led the groups with the school mental health professional, like the school counselor, and that can be great because the school counselor can, pop into the classroom and remind them to have their goal sheet signed, or see them in the hall and give them a reminder or check how they're doing. So it's great when you can have that more frequent input. But often we are coming in just once a week. That's the only time we see the children for the week. And so we are relying on them to take their goal sheet to the teacher, or the teacher to remind them about that. So in that case, if that's your setup, then it's important to involve the teachers as much as possible, and you do rely on them for being able to provide some of that consistency. And then to follow through on whether if you've agreed, if you don't have money for a prize box with toys or trinkets in it and you're relying on, classroom incentives, then you do want to make sure that you save time to check whether or not the teacher's following through on an incentive that they've promised the child. And then if not, to communicate with the teacher to that, or even shift to a different incentive that you can actually provide yourself to make sure that they're getting the incentives that they've earned.
Can I just ask you a question about timing? Because you mentioned, I work in spaces too, and I know it's very difficult sometimes to take a manualized program and actually get everything in the session covered.
Mm-hmm.
Our limited, the period maybe 45 minutes instead of an hour. And by the time you get there, you've got another 10 minutes of that. So later on, could you talk, once you've gone over the new program, about the essential components of each session that need to be covered, so that if you are limited in terms of time, things can kind of leave out.
Mm-hmm.
We had to do that with programs that we've developed that are manualized because of the time constraints. So if you could just keep that in the back.
Sure. Yeah, and I think it's essential to. Yeah, do you want to jump in? Well, I was going to say some of the essential components would be some of the routine objectives that the children are used to at the beginning and the end of each session, that you want to make sure that you save time for the review at the beginning, the goal sheet check-in at the beginning, the positive feedback, and the point box at the end, because those are kind of routine things that the children learn that you want to stick to. As far as the content in the middle, it is a balance between moving at a pace that the children can follow and attain some mastery of the concept and move through the material, but not rush so quickly to check off the box that you covered that content that you really lose the children. So it's kind of following a balance. And generally, the recommendation is to try to stick to an agenda and plan amount of time for each topic so that you can get through as much as possible. But if you ever find that you're really losing the children, it's worth it to slow down or save the content for the next session so that they're with you and you're not just moving so quickly that you lose them.
It's a real challenge. In a real life program school, to cover everything in a manualized program in a short period of time.
Yeah, I think there's two things. One is the issue that Carolyn just mentioned, which is even though these are set up as sessions, they're really flexible. So you can carry stuff over to a next session. From the program's perspective, that's not a problem. You might have problems yourself with the number of weeks in a year that you have to get it done. But in terms of the program, that's fine. You can adjust that. You can decide what pace is working for the kids. And that's a real reasonable, very common adaptation, I think. The other issue is, this is a little tricky, I guess, in a way, but the manual is organized so there's objectives, and the content objective might be, one of the next coming sessions will be understanding emotions or something about emotions. And frankly, you all are clinicians, right? And the most important thing is that objective, and that's more important than the 2 or 3 activities underneath it. And so if you feel that objective is met with just one activity, that's fine. In fact, well, that's great, you move forward. If you feel the 3 activities aren't enough, and I need to go back over it again in another session, that's fine too. So, again, it's important to use your clinical skill in estimating that. The manual is meant to provide this framework, kind of a nice, comfortable framework, and kind of work with it. But boy, you can play around with it quite a bit.
And it's important to attend to real-life process issues in the room as well, and to not be in such a hurry to cover all of the material that you kind of miss out on important teaching moments in the room. So an example, in a group that I ran, we met at lunchtime, so they got their food from the lunchroom first and kind of ate during the first part of the session. And on the way to group, two boys got in an argument that one accused the other of stealing something off of his lunch tray. And so it was important to actually reserve time to process that, even though it wasn't part of the planned content for the day. And what we did was try to tie it in. We were actually on the unit on problem solving. So we can use that as our real life example of, here's the problem that you two are arguing over, whose fruit snacks these are. Let's kind of talk that through and think of how we're going to work this out as a group. So you have to be attentive to some of those processes going on in the room as well, and address those also. Yeah.
So actually, our response to that, I think, is somewhat complicated because we had the research that we talked about earlier is with this full 34-session program for kids, 16 sessions for parents. We have done some other research on a shorter version of the program that's 24 sessions for kids and 10 sessions for parents. It really covers the high points and is, and we have some confidence about the effects of that because we have data, right? And then we've got variations that we don't have data on, but it's between you and I, or between us. And we know that it's going to hit on the main topics, but for various populations, for various groups of clinicians, they needed something different. So for example, when we did this training up in New York State for the clinicians, they have limited time with these kids. So the program was broken down to 15 core sessions and then a set of optional sessions that could be added on depending upon a particular child's area of work. And that's easier to do if you're working one-to-one with kids. So you can kind of have a core set and then you can add. But you could do something somewhat similar, I think, with groups. So what I would encourage is if anybody is starting to use the program, if you have those questions, just feel free to check with us because chances are you're asking something we've already heard. And we can tell you what somebody else did. Yeah.
We've worked with school guidance counselors, school psychologists, our own staff will come in and run it. So there's social workers in the school, so it's been a mix of different types of mental health professionals. Just to move us along, I'll cover a few more slides before we have a break. So after this activity that you've all now practiced on setting long-term and short-term goals, we also have a discussion about the fact that running into barriers to accomplishing your goals is something to be expected. So you've set a goal for yourself of bringing up your conduct grade, and someone really got on your nerves, and you yelled at him in class. And got in trouble for that. So we want to elicit those kinds of examples from the students and kind of normalize for them that we're not perfect and those kinds of things happen at times. We want to try to use it as a learning experience, what we could do differently next time to get back on track and continue working on our goal. And as part of that process, there's a supplementary activity. When Dr. Lochman was at Duke University, they actually interviewed a well-known Duke basketball player about him, and he kind of talked about being in elementary school and wanting to be a college basketball player and some of the things that he had to do along the way in elementary school and middle school and some of the sacrifices that he had to make. So, practicing basketball when other kids were playing, or staying up late to do his homework after basketball practice, or not getting into trouble, or giving in to peer pressure, in high school so that he, could be a good teammate and stay on the team. So that's kind of an optional activity. We show children that video as an example of how goal setting can play a role in adults' life and reaching long-term goals down the road, and also some of the barriers that are encountered along the way. And you could also assign it as an activity for the children to do outside of group, to try to either interview their parents or their teacher about how goal setting played a role in their life, or if they want to be a veterinarian, to try to connect them with a local veterinarian and let them interview that person about what they had to do to get to that part in their life and what barriers they ran into and how they overcame those. So that's an optional activity, but can be one that's very meaningful for the children if they're able to do that. Right, so that's where your clinical skill comes in, essentially. So to kind of have the clinical information that you have in your head from teachers and parents or any assessment data that you have on the child about what their clinical needs are, and to, through this collaborative conversation with the child about what the child wants for themselves or what they think they need to work on, to come up with this list of very specific short-term goals that address some of the areas that their teacher or parent has said they need to work on, but in a way that the child's kind of endorsing that they're going to work on those goals. So the goal is to have that a list of a number of short-term goals that reflects those areas by the end of the second and third session. And then if you're able to come up with that list, you can use that to pick goals for the weekly goal sheet for the duration of the program. So you can refer back to that. And then some children will keep the same goal for quite a long time until they're getting yeses, 4 or 5 days a week. Other children will change if a new behavior is brought to your attention that needs to be worked on, or if they've kind of burnt out on their goal and ready for a new goal. It actually, in this case, each child would have this workbook, so it would be in their workbook, but it would be important in your clinical documentation to have notes on what their goal is that they're working on as well.
Is there a regular part of reevaluating goals in the structure of the program, or you just do it spontaneously?
We do it in two ways, in a fairly cursory way through the group discussion and that goal-setting objective at the beginning of each group session, and then more in-depth through periodic individual contacts with each child. So you have more time to go into that if you can have some monthly or periodic individual meetings with each child. That's a very helpful use of that time, to spend time in more depth on how they're doing on their goals and if those are still appropriate goals or if they could be modified.